Let's talk about D&D 5th edition 2024. And more importantly, let's talk about why D&D 5th edition 2024 is the title and why it isn't called 6th edition. Howdy folks, my name is Sean, welcome back to Delver, and you might immediately realize this isn't like my normal type of video. I got no script. I have bullet points because this is kind of a spur of the moment thing. On today's video, I'm going to talk about first why it isn't called 6th edition or why it isn't called 5.5, kind of get into the history and the generals about that. And then afterward, I'm going to talk about some of the things I'm afraid of for this new edition, things that I'm excited for, but ultimately why I'm going to transition into this new edition. First up is why it isn't called 6th edition or why it isn't called 5.5. Why in the hell is it called D&D 5th edition 2024? To understand that, we need to go back in time, back to the 80s and the 90s. When D&D first came out, it was a massive success. And around, I think it's 1989, they decided to do D&D 2nd edition. Now, 𝐁𝐸 was already gone from the company at this time, but there were a lot of licensing issues, a lot of issues with, who made and owns the intellectual property. There were legal battles fought in the late 70s and early 80s between Dave Arneson and 𝐁𝐸. So the question becomes, who really owns this property? And if we print stuff for it and make new content for it, do those people who still created it get paid for it? Everyone kind of knew the answer, but it was still up in the air. There had been legal precedent set already through Arneson and 𝐁𝐸's basically legal warring that they did for many years. So they make 2nd edition. But then they begin to realize that, TSR is going down. They're not making as much money, so they start putting out weird setting books, but people are still playing D&D, which makes them confused. They're like, we're not doing well as a company, but we go to conventions, we hear stories about people, everyone seems to be playing this game. Well, the truth of the matter is everyone was playing Dungeons and Dragons, they just weren't playing 2nd edition. Aside from the hardcore hobbyists or people who, got into it with 2nd edition, or somebody had, who was more of a fan, got them into it, a lot of people stuck around in the older edition. And the reason why makes a lot of sense. It's money. You see, when you tell a game store, like, hey, by the way, we're going to be releasing a new edition. Remember all those books you bought for AD&D or any of our supplemental material? Too bad. We're going to be releasing a brand new edition. And if you want to keep current with our new products, you need to buy that new edition. So unfortunately, a lot of people didn't end up getting the book because it wasn't really readily available to them with smaller game stores. And I can't blame them for that. Why would you, restock this brand new game when you have the old game still in your shelf? And this is kind of an unproven company. Yeah, they had a huge breakout success, but you don't know where it's going to go from there. The other big thing was the player side. Players really didn't want to purchase a new book. It's expensive. And on top of all of that, they already have all the material that they need for the, the older edition. And they were already told that this was going to be somewhat backward compatible. True. 2nd edition is very similar to AD&D, so there wasn't a lot of changes going on. So why am I going to spend all this money on a new book when I'm already in a campaign with my friends playing? And, there's a possibility we're not going to be continuing past this campaign. Let's just keep what we have. Now, let's compare that to now. Wizards of the Coast had a massive hit with D&D 5e. It has exploded way beyond what it used to be. It's much more casual now, and that's kind of the deterrent for calling it 6th edition. Let me put it into this kind of perspective. If you are a new player or you are a more casual player and you have bought the books, you've been playing for maybe a year or two, and then all of a sudden somebody tells you, hey, by the way, there's a new version of that book coming out. You're not going to want to spend $150+ on a brand new slate of books just to play the game that you're already playing. Yeah, the hobbyists, the people that watch this video, of course you're going to, or you're probably excited to, because that's what we do. We love this game. We love this hobby. We want to continue with it. That's just, it's like playing a video game. It's like getting the new Xbox 360. Oh God. I just dated myself really hard there. It's like buying the new edition of a console so you can play the new games. For people that are gamers, that makes sense. But if you are a huge fan of Kirby Epic Yarn, you're just going to stick with your Wii. In the same sense, if you call it a brand new edition and put this huge price tag on it, people are less inclined to go out and buy it. However, if you, already were going to buy 1 or 2 books for your game later this year or later next year, more specifically, then if you see it and it's like, oh, it's still 5th edition, it's just some updated rules, yeah, you're more likely to buy it. Yeah, you're probably not going to buy all 3 books, but saying it's backward compatible, calling it 5th edition, this just seems like a brand new condensed version of the thing you already have. Maybe you're interested in that, kind of like with the Monsters of the Multiverse. So basically why they're not calling it 6th edition is because if they call it 6th edition, then they run the risk of it collapsing in on itself and only hardcore hobbyists buying it and kind of losing that more casual audience that is playing and probably sustaining a massive portion of the D&D audience. So that then begs the question, why isn't it called D&D 5.5? We had D&D 3.5. Well, there is a very specific reason why they're probably not doing that. First off, 3.5 or 5.5 sounds clunky. It just does. I know to us, people that are used to calling it D&D 3.5, it doesn't sound that crazy, but if you're kind of looking at it on a shelf, 3.5 doesn't really fit into the more minimalistic idea that people have for fantasy titles or book titles nowadays. It sounds like a patch for a video game, which is what it would be implying with the 0.5. Furthermore, 3.5 was called 3.5 because it was a bunch of rules clarifications, slight changes, and a condensed version of it, which might sound very similar to what D&D 5th edition 2020, it's such a terrible title, D&D 5th edition 2024 is. But the truth is, that's not what it is. D&D 5th edition 2024 maintains a lot of the same rules and core mechanics that D&D 5th edition has, but importantly, it fully innovates on the classes, the subclasses, the races, character building, features. Everything about this is different. Yeah, the core mechanics are not, I understand that, but everything else about the game has shifted dramatically. So to call this a 0.5, a patch, an innovation, a clarification, a slight addition, no, it is way beyond that. So you can't call it 0.5 because if you do, A, it's clunky, B, it's going to basically be a lie as to what it actually is. And going back to what the casual gamer is going to see, they're going to see 0.5. I don't need that. I don't need the patch. I don't need the slight change. I want something kind of new, but I don't want something too new. It's such a weird world with casual gamers. I totally understand it, but at the same time, as a hobbyist, I'm like, ugh. So to put it simply, the reason it isn't called 6th edition is because there's a possibility that casual gamers are going to fully reject it if that is the case, and they can't call it 5.5 because 5.5 isn't accurate to what it is, and it would basically be risking everything on a little bit more of a clarification on what it might be. So, D&D 5th edition 2024, absolutely terrible title, hands down, across the board, just awful. But it is a little better than 1 D&D, which was even worse in my opinion. I don't get the obsession with calling it 1, like Battlefield 1 or Xbox 1. I don't understand what the obsession with going back to the number 1 is. But D&D tried to do it. I'm guessing it tested horribly, so they pivoted, found something that worked a little better and was a more applicable, which was the D&D 2024. Now, do I think that there are better options? 100%. There should be a different title for what this game is because it is not that. But do I know what that is? Not even a little bit. I'm not going to pretend that I do. But I think that if they really tried, they could create something that was interesting enough and maybe didn't drive people away immediately. That's the core of what this video is, why it isn't called 6th edition, why isn't it called 5.5. But now, as the poll says, I'm going to kind of talk about my fears for this new edition, as well as things that I am excited for with this new edition. Well, and also, just to be clear, I'm not going to show any pages from the book. I don't have the book. I'm just going to talk about the kind of nebulous things that I know are floating around. And I'm not really going to reference anything specifically because it's apt to change in any capacity going forward. So I am just going to talk about what I do know, why I think it's good or why I think it's bad. First and foremost, this new edition is heavily favoring players and their ability to power game. Is that a positive? Is that a negative? For me, that's a negative. I think for some people that is a positive. The classes and the subclasses in the 2024 version far exceed the classes and the subclasses in the 2014 version. And I understand that they say that they are backward compatible, but for the love of God, if you play a fighter from 2014 in a 2024 game, you are fucked. You are absolutely screwed because the power difference is insane, especially early on. And I think this is a general trend that Wizards of the Coast and D&D and kind of the TTRPG market in general, save for games that kind of go against the flow, is this idea of a superhero fantasy. This, you are Captain America with chainmail. But that's what it is, truly. It is superhero fantasy. It's such high fantasy that it even goes beyond what I would consider to be high fantasy and edges into the realm of just wanton power. I like powerful characters. I like making powerful characters, but there comes a point when it gets a little too powerful. For example, I am running a level 20 campaign in D&D 5e right now, and for the love of God, it is so broken. I understand that D&D 5th edition really wasn't, balanced at that level, and it isn't balanced at that level. I have to change everything about my monsters just to keep up with my players. Plus, I gave them a lot of leeway on magic items. We're not going to get into it. But yeah, I don't like that super powered fantasy over the top action. I like a little bit more grounded content, which this edition isn't looking like it is going to provide in any meaningful way. Furthermore, leveled spellcasting is something that I am vehemently skeptical toward. I don't disagree with it. I just think that a lot of the spells and the way that they are upcasted is terrible. I'm sure many of you have seen that what is it? The Scorching Ray mixed with the new Conjure Elementals, I believe, in the new edition. It can do somewhere in the range of like 400 to 500 average damage in one round, which is insane, but it also requires like a level 9 and a level 8 spell slot. But what I mean to say is that the designers didn't plan for that. They didn't look into that. And they make these spells upcasted much more powerful than they should be. Should leveled spellcasting be taken out? I don't believe so. But yeah, I feel that when it comes to me to fix that, that's not where it should. The onus is on the designers to fix and maintain spells so they are not broken. And I think upcasting just kind of shatters that sometimes. Now, those are my main fears for this new edition. Let's talk about things that I'm actually excited for. First off, and I know this is the controversial one, paladins have to use a bonus action for their smite now. I actually fully agree with this. Not because I think that a bonus action should be used for it. I think it should be tweaked in a little bit. Maybe it's like, they can only do one per turn. Because the truth is, smite is incredibly broken at high levels. If you get a paladin who can do 2 to 3 attacks per round, depending on their subclass, they can do an incredible amount of damage, especially if they are fighting fiends or undead. And I totally understand that that is the point of it, but at a level 20 barbarian in the same campaign, when I was having a paladin doing 100 points of damage with a smite, was doing 15 points of damage with their axe. Not to say that that is the cap on the barbarian or that is the lowest amount that a paladin could do. I'm just saying that it highly encourages the paladin to kind of just rinse monsters. And I think adding in a stipulation that kind of limits how many smites they can do on an attack, I think that's pretty good. Druids can talk to animals now, and it's not as difficult as preparing a spell and casting it. From what I understand, they can just kind of do it now, which I love. Actually, I'm a huge fan of Dungeon World, and one of the big things I love about Dungeon World is A, unlimited wild shapes that don't really change your stats too much, and B, the fact that you are able to talk to nature at any given moment. I think adding in the stipulation that you have to have a spell prepared, or even if it's given to you for free, I think that's a little weird. I prefer it when it's much, much easier for the class to do the thing that the class is supposed to do. And kind of building on that, Druids now can wild shape as a bonus action. I believe that's all subclasses of Druid. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think that being able to, wild shape that quickly, awesome. I think it adds a lot more complexity to battles when you can wild shape and then attack in the same round. And my favorite class, Fighter, has a lot more abilities, a lot more customization with the martial powers or whatever, with the weapon masteries. I think that it is going to make Fighters much more digestible for people who maybe are more used to spellcasting. I personally think Fighter is incredible, and I think it's one of the best classes, especially when you combine it with another class. So I'm excited to see more Fighters out there. Now, this one is kind of a boon, kind of a detriment. The new official setting, as far as I'm aware, is Greyhawk. If you're not aware, Greyhawk is the original setting that the Castles and Crusaders Society, I believe it was called, which was Gary Gygax basically getting all his friends together and saying, hey, I have a map. I'm going to give you a little kingdom on it. There you go. Your kingdom's right there. And that's how we get Castle Blackmore. That's how we got originally Greyhawk, but then it became the setting of Greyhawk. It's a lot of things. But yeah, Greyhawk seems to be the new official setting, or at least the setting you can kind of throw in from the player's handbook and immediately start running the game. Personally, I think that's really cool. I love Greyhawk. I've run it myself technically when I put my players through Expedition to the Barrier Peaks last spring, and I think people are going to really enjoy Greyhawk. However, Greyhawk is not high fantasy from what I understand. Greyhawk has high fantasy elements, but it's much more of your like Chronicles of Prydain or Lord of the Rings, where, there's magic out there, magical things exist, and sometimes they are fairly prominent, especially in the campaign, but you're not going to walk into a city and see people on flying carpets. At least that was my understanding of what Greyhawk was. I don't know how they're going to change it. I don't know if they're going to update it. I don't know if we're going to see Tiefling walking around. Tiefling might actually be from there. I forget. Basically, they might be doing something that they did in 4th edition, which was try to create a mono setting, which didn't really work out for them. So I'm hoping that they don't do that. I'm hoping they respect Greyhawk enough to make it a little bit more choosy, a little bit more specific to certain campaigns. But from what I'm understanding, it looks like it's going to be the new classic setting for D&D 2024. Now, the biggest thing that I am excited for, regardless of changes and additions, is that this is going to condense character creation back to one book. Because I'm going to be completely honest with you, a lot of the spells, a lot of the additions that they have made over the years through, Strixhaven or, random other source books, not all of them are winners. And I kind of hate it when a player needs 5 or more books just to keep track of their character's abilities. Well, the subclass is from this book, the race is from this book, the feat is from this book, the spell is from this book. It gets a little out of hand a little too quickly. So for me, I'm excited for the condensed nature of it. So you can bring one book, flip through, find what you need, and I'm hoping that they're going to fix some of the spells that I have issues with. I'm looking at you, Steel Wind Strike and Silvery Barb. But yeah, that's what my hope is. I hope they're going to fix some of those things. I already know they're condensing it, which is a huge plus in my book, literally. Plus, it looks like the races are really awesome, and I like how they've switched some of your attributes going to your background rather than your race. Actually, personally, I'm a huge fan of that. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm really excited for the new edition. I do have my fears and reservations about it. And I do agree that it shouldn't have the name D&D 5th edition. It's so much. It's genuinely just too much. But yeah, what are your guys' thoughts? What are you excited for? What are you fearful about? Did you like this more kind of off the cuff video? Jesus, I have been recording for 22 minutes now. That's a lot, especially off script. So I'm going to go ahead and end the video here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Ooh.